making sense of the madness. Today we're going to be talking about the psychology of totalitarianism with author Matthias Desmet. You're not going to want to miss it. Buckle up and get ready to make sense of the madness. We are now joined by Matthias Desmet. Matthias, thank you so much for joining us. Now, when we talk about totalitarianism, I see a lot of different authoritarian flavors, especially today. A lot of people want to talk about communism or socialism, but really at the end of the day, I would say that collectivism is really what brings that authoritarian, totalitarian state into existence. What are your thoughts?
Collectivism is one aspect of totalitarianism, yes, but a specific kind of collectivism, which I coined, or which I use the term mass formation for. And another extremely important aspect is rationalism. That's the root cause of the technocratic totalitarianism that is emerging now everywhere in the world. I always try to provide a historical perspective, because without that perspective, we cannot really understand how we can deal with totalitarianism. That's extremely important. A good analysis of the problem is just quintessential, is crucial to know what we can do. And in my book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, I show how the root cause of the problem of totalitarian systems, which is something completely different than a classical dictatorship, by the way, but the root cause of the problem of totalitarianism is our rationalist view on man and the world, which emerged after the French Revolution. After the French Revolution, the religious view on man and the world collapsed and was replaced by the rationalist view on man and the world, which means a view on man and the world which believes that the essence of life can be grasped in a rational way, that rational knowledge, rather than ethical principles, should be the guiding principle in individual and collective human life. And that's where the root cause of the problems we find ourselves in now have to be situated. As soon as the rationalist view on man and the world became dominant, people pushed ethical awareness to the second level. And at the same time, two extremely important things happened in our society. One situated at the level of the elite, another process situated at the level of the population. First thing was, at the level of the elite, that we were slowly seeing the emergence of an elite which more and more excessively used propaganda to keep control of society. And the second evolution was that we could see how the population became more and more atomized, to use the term of Hegel. That means more and more disconnected from nature and from each other. And these two evolutions reinforced each other. The more lonely a population is, the more disconnected, the more it is vulnerable to propaganda. And that's how, throughout the last 2 centuries, we could see how a cancer, a tumor, developed in the social fabric. The tumor of totalitarianism, which, according to Hannah Arendt, always boils down to a diabolic pact between the masses and the elite. A diabolic pact between an elite which relentlessly uses this modern type of lie, which we call propaganda, and a population which is craving for a master and which blindly goes along with this new kind of lie, with this propaganda. And now, at this moment, I've described it really in detail in my book, how this But the psychological mechanism of totalitarianism is, and now at this moment, we are experiencing the emergence of we are going through the emergence of the most impressive, dreadful totalitarian system the world has ever seen. A global technocratic totalitarianism in which the propaganda machinery that is involved is exponentially stronger and more sophisticated than the propaganda machinery of, let's say, Stalin, and in which the population is even much more vulnerable to propaganda than in the era of the first totalitarian systems, the communist and the fascist totalitarian systems of the first half of the 20th century.
So let's break a lot of that down. First of all, when you talk about rationalism, obviously that word seems like a good word. You want people to be quote unquote rational, but you've also mentioned technocratic society. So you see, I think, this genesis of the idea of not so much morality and ethics, but driven towards science in a top-down manner. You mentioned modern day propaganda. I'd love to get into Bernays with you, but when you look at that movement away from general morals, ethics, nature, is that why the general populace has become more and more malleable over these past 2 decades? Because, like you said, at this point, we really are facing a global totalitarian agenda, whereas in the past it was somewhat regional.
Yes, that's true. In the past, when we are talking about totalitarianism, we always think of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany in the first half of the 20th century. But actually, there was a totalitarian tendency everywhere in the world, also in the America of the beginning of the 20th century. For instance, the way in which propaganda was used and so-called 4-minute men were used to convince the population, to coerce or manipulate the population into participating in the First World War, was totalitarian in nature. It was totalitarian in nature, and like the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, they were just the most articulated and extreme examples of this totalitarian tendency which happened everywhere in the world. But exactly as you said, like you refer to rationalism, and there is something very important about that. Rationalism is not the same as being rational. Being a rationalist is not the same as being rational. Rationalism is the fanatic belief that the core of life, the essence of life, can be understood in a rational way. And strangely enough, that's radically against science. All major seminal scientists actually concluded the same. The essence of life can never be understood in a rational way. For instance, complex dynamical systems theory, the most important paradigm in sciences in the second half of the 20th century, literally proved that every complex dynamical system in nature, which is most phenomena in nature, is behaving as literally an irrational number in mathematics. So it's literally irrational, meaning that even with the formula of the system in your hand, you can, for instance, never predict how the system will behave. So the essence of life is irrational, and we can only know it by empathically resonating with it. That's why Einstein said, many people believe that rational thinking is the basis of scientific discovery, but that's not true, he said. It's much more a capacity for Einfühlung, for empathic resonance with what you are investigating, that leads to the important rational scientific discoveries. And he said that like cosmic religious awareness was the best starting point for science. To give only a few examples, I could give you as much as you want. But I mean, The essence of life is not rational in nature. It's not rational. And we have to rediscover what it means to empathically resonate with the world around us. And the more we do, as happens, for instance, when people use masculine or in mystical experience or in the seminal religious experience, people fully resonate with the world around them. They literally, that's what they all describe, independent of each other, they become one with other people around them and even with the entire universe around them. And it's from this feeling of being one with everything around you that automatically ethical awareness develops. Of course, if you feel the other, just like a small child, for instance, is also in that state. A child feels identical to the world around it. It can even not distinguish between itself and the other. And it is from this state of oneness, as Meister Eckhart, one of the most important mystics of Europe, it is from this state of oneness, like that automatically ethical awareness emerges. You feel the other, meaning that you will not hurt the other because you hurt yourself. So something like that. So that's the state. That's the real knowing of the world, not rational knowledge. And the rational knowledge is only a means towards an end. And the end, as samurai culture, for instance, knew very well, the end is always resonating, intuitive knowledge, the sixth sense of the warrior, as the samurai called it.
We are going to take a quick break. When we come back, I kind of want to explore that spirituality aspect, and I also want to explore the scientific aspect and what it really means to totalitarianism and authoritarianism. The book is The Psychology of Totalitarianism, and we'll be back with more Making Sense of the Madness after this.
The world is about to shift. Banks are going cashless globally with the emergence of central bank digital currency, which will bring with it programmable money and the ability to turn on or off your purchasing power based on your digital social profile. It's like the equivalent of spyware in your bank account. You need to get out of the system with the world's safest and most precious assets, silver and gold. Call Kirk Elliott Precious Metals at 720-605-3900. That's 720-605-3900.
Don't let them win. Patriot TV is committed to delivering the truth. America's new network for patriots is growing fast, and we'd love you to join us as a member of Patriot TV. Your support makes it possible for us to continue to deliver unbiased reporting, thought-provoking discussions, and insights you won't find anywhere else. From in-depth interviews to behind-the-scenes footage, Patriot TV brings you closer to the voices shaping our nation's future. Whether it's political developments, cultural shifts, or global affairs, Patriot TV keeps you informed and empowered. As a member of Patriot TV, you'll get perks like personal invitations to exclusive Patriot TV events, where you can gather and network with like-minded Americans. We'll also host online events throughout the year with General Flynn, who's committed to host live Q&A webinars where callers like you can ask him questions and get real answers. Access to these events will be members only, so go to patriot.tv, click on Become a Member. It's fast and easy. We have a great membership option starting at just $9.99 a month, or save with our annual membership for only $99, or take advantage of the best value, the 2-year membership for just $159. Go to patriot.tv, click on Become a Member. It's fast and easy. Do your part to make sure the truth gets out to all patriots and help ensure future programming. Become a member today. Just go to patriot.tv, click on Become a Member, join today.
We are back, and you just kind of described this spiritual aspect to humanity. And for me, I don't tell people what to believe religiously. I always say at the end of the day, I believe in good and evil and that there is a force on the planet. I don't believe that our rights are derived from the state and science can explain everything. But yet you see that ideology being pushed more and more, that you don't have inherent rights that are given by some type of creator, and instead it is the authority of an individual, a state, a government, etc., that gives you these rights. And I think we've moved further and further towards that as spirituality, as modern day religion has become lessened. Am I crazy for thinking that?
No, of course not. But the challenge is, I think, to see the connection with rationalism itself, because like in the religious view on man and the world, people, no matter what, I mean, religion was often very dogmatic and hypocrite and so on, but still, the religious narrative focused people's attention on their ethical principles. And after, when the modern materialist, rationalist view on man and the world emerges, this view on man and the world believed that truth is not revealed by God or no matter what mystical experience or something. Truth is constructed by observing the world with your eyes and connecting rationally the facts that you observe. So the rationalist view on man and the world focused psychological attention, focused psychological energy, literally on the visual surface of things. And that's how also the human being became obsessed by the visual surface of itself. We became more and more narcissistic because we believed that the essence of who we are can be discovered by visual observation. Strangely enough, it's exactly this what isolated people, like that's one thing that I will describe in my next book, because so many people have observed that the population became more and more lonely and disconnected, but nobody could really explain why, or at least not at the psychological level. And that's it's typically a consequence of rationalism, and that's the strange thing. Once people get locked up in their outer visual image, their outer visual ideal image, they start to feel lonely, disconnected, and then they start to be confronted with lack of meaning making in life automatically. A lonely human being does not have spontaneous experiences of meaning anymore, of purpose in life. And then, once it feels lonely and disconnected, I've explained that many times because it's crucial. Once it feels lonely and disconnected, it will start to be confronted with what I call in my book free-floating anxiety, frustration, and aggression, meaning that it will be confronted with all kinds of negative affectivity and emotions, which it cannot connect anymore to a cause, to a mental representation. And this state is highly aversive. Once people are in this state, they feel completely out of control, as most people feel now. People feel extremely lonely, never more than before. Up to 60% reports to feel completely isolated. Up to 60% reports to have no experiences of meaning and purpose in life and to consider their own job to be a so-called bullshit job. And this free-floating anxiety is it's everywhere. It's like there are so many anxiety disorders, so much depression. It's the statistics are unbelievable. And it's this state with free-floating anxiety, frustration, and aggression, which makes people feel completely helpless and out of control. And when people are in this state, and the narrative is distributed through the mass media, indicating an object of anxiety, and providing a strategy to deal with that object of anxiety, for instance, lockdowns to deal with a virus. All this free-floating anxiety in the population will connect to the object of anxiety, and people will be willing to participate in the strategy to deal with that object of anxiety, even if that strategy is utterly absurd. That was what happened during the corona crisis, and that was what happened to a lesser extent later on with the war in Ukraine, and so on. But the basic problem is that we are in the grip of a rationalist view on man and the world, which promotes this elite and this constant use of propaganda to seize control and manipulate the population, and on the other hand, which pushes forward the loneliness and a disconnection in the population, making the population vulnerable for propaganda.
Now, what you just described, I can't help but thinking of the Hegelian dialectic of problem, reaction, solution. But I think that the problem that you're describing is a very real one. And unfortunately, I feel like it's not just COVID 1984 lockdowns. I feel like there's a large sect of especially the Western population that has become extremely malleable on a number of issues. And some of those issues, for instance, involve children and transgenderism and the idea that the nuclear family is no longer in control of that child, and offering a state solution. In other words, our education system has kind of been captured by this ideology as well. And it's always based in the science. And I don't think there's been a time in modern day history where, quote unquote, the science has been hammered home as much as being unified and really authoritarian in nature. If you do not believe this, too bad, so sad. We're going with our rules and regulations, and we'll try to stomp you out if you dare speak up. Is that what you're seeing, especially in Western culture, or am I missing something?
That's part of the phenomenon I'm describing in totalitarian systems. Yes, like science seems to be the ultimate master now, but of course it's not science. What the most part of the academic world nowadays, and we've seen that during the corona crisis, everything that was guaranteed by science turned out to be wrong. Almost everything. The origin of the virus, the vaccines being safe and effective, the mortality rates of the virus, and so on and so on. It all turned out to be wrong. But what is seizing control now of society? The discourse that is seizing control is not a scientific discourse; it's a scientist discourse, something that looks like science, but which actually is exactly the opposite. We could have known it because I made my PhD about this problem in the sciences, and in 2005 already. It turned out during the so-called replication crisis that up to 85% of the academic papers cannot be reproduced, which means in scientific terms that they are worthless. Up to 85%. You can look at the work of myself or of people like John Ioannidis, who really wrote several wonderful papers about it. He's the most famous biomedical statistician in the world, and he wrote this wonderful paper, Why Most Published Research Papers Are False. So, but it's so what is our culture believes in the illusion of a complete superior rational knowledge, which actually should be the guiding principle in life. And it believes that this idea that we could understand life completely in a rational way is so attractive because it promises that after rational understanding, or that rational understanding will be ensued by a complete capacity to control and manipulate the world. And like centuries ago, 2 centuries ago, people like Saint-Simon, for instance, a philosopher, claimed already that the human being would become God. Like nowadays, Yuval Noah Harari articulates such ideas in for instance, in his bestseller, Homo Deus, that people would become God on the basis of the rational knowledge, that they would inherit divine capacities for creation and destruction. And that's also like you refer to the woke ideology, and the woke ideology is part of this tendency in society. What woke ideology actually tells you, and what makes it attractive to some young people and many young people, is that it tells you that you are in control of your life and of your sexuality, that you can choose what you are, a man, a woman, or even something else, doesn't matter. You are in control, and science will help you to become what you want. So that is what makes rationalism so attractive, even when it is completely irrational. That's one characteristic of rationalism. In the end, it becomes always radically and absurdly irrational. And like as I said, woke ideology, I believe, in the ultimate analysis, is part of the problem of our rationalist view on man in the world. In the end, it all boils down to this: the hubris of the human being, which believes that his rational knowledge will be capable of producing a kind of absolute truth, which will lead to absolute control of the human condition. And the strange thing is, like, the more humanity got in the grip of this belief that rational inquiry would lead to the ultimate truth, the more it fell prey to the absolute lie. That's a strange thing. Like, as soon as this rationalist view on man in the world emerged, we could see how propaganda, modern propaganda, started to emerge, and we could see how more and more both the elite and the population became convinced that speaking the truth was something only idiots do. Because speaking the truth, like a within the materialist, rationalist view on man in the world, we became convinced that the human being, that the highest goal and the highest achievement of a human being is to survive. We should be the smartest and the fittest in the struggle to survive. And speaking the truth, the ancient Greeks knew that already, is always risky. Someone who speaks the truth jeopardizes himself. He puts himself at risk, because speaking the truth is exactly articulating words that penetrate through the veil of appearances. And hence, most people will be angry with you when you speak the truth, and they might kill you. So, as soon as the rationalist view on man emerged, we became convinced that speaking the truth was for idiots, and the elite relied more and more on the opposite of truth, on manipulation and lies to keep control. And so that's a strange thing. And nowadays we find ourselves in a situation where propaganda is everywhere.
I want to delve into the term propaganda when we come back, but in the tail end, because you hit on so many different things. You even really hit on modern day transhumanist philosophy, which for me is extremely important and a core of this totalitarian globalist ideology. We're going to get into that when we come back. The Psychology of Totalitarianism is the book. Back with more Making Sense of the Madness after this.
Did you know that thousands of authors across the country have written books and published them with Page Publishing? If you've written a book, Page Publishing can help you through the process. We cut through the confusion of the publishing world to make it easy for you. If we decide to publish your book, your work ends and ours begins. From copy editing and proofing to typesetting and book cover art, we get you printed, distributed, and sold on Amazon, Apple iTunes, and in bookstores across the country. We'll even help you promote your book. That's right, we do all this for you. Biography, self-help, mystery, novels, sci-fi, even a children's book. No matter what genre, Page Publishing can bring your book to life. Call today for your free author submission kit and find out how you can be the next published author at Page Publishing.
Call for your free author submission kit at 855-993-2114. That's 855-993-2114.
Throughout history, the spirit of patriotism has prevailed. The battles may have changed, but the values remain the same. Today, in 2024, we find ourselves at a pivotal moment where the call for unity, freedom, and a better future echoes louder than ever. For more than 10 years, Patriot Mobile has been committed to supporting the values that make our nation great. With affordable plans and reliable nationwide coverage, Patriot Mobile is not just a wireless service. It's a call to action for those who believe in the American dream. Because this year is not just any year, it's the most important year since our nation's founding. Choose a wireless carrier that shares your values. choose Patriot Mobile.
And we are back. Now, you mentioned Yuval Noah Harari and the idea of us becoming gods and transcending these ooey gooey biological husks that we have. He's far from the only person who's articulated this. And really, for me, he's kind of just the mouthpiece of the agenda and some of the negativities that might go along with it, obviously speaking at the World Economic Forum. But when you look at the core of the people that really brought us this, you got to look at somebody like Ray Kurzweil, for instance, the godfather of the singularity, hired by Google a decade and a half ago, that has their own immortality division, Calico Labs. And I would also argue that when you talk about technocratic agendas in states, I always use the term technopoly. I get the idea of technocratic because we're not saying democratic, we're saying bureaucratic in that. But really, technopoly to me makes more sense because they've already picked the winners and losers. I mean, Google is so embedded in our society, culture, American government, but governments around the world. They have Defense Department contracts. They're working with NASA on artificial intelligence, quantum computing, et cetera. And these people also seem to be obsessed with a thing called directed evolution, right? We talked about becoming gods. So in other words, they do think that man can biologically change anything. And, you know, you talked about this idea of disassociating people from their biological reality and telling them they can be whatever they wanted to be. We've seen it expand from a boy being able to be a girl being able to be a boy, to the idea of non-binary, where you're fluid, you're zeros and ones. Obviously, there's the comparison there to computer programming. In my mind, that again detaches us away from our humanity. And now we've gone full board where you've got kids dressing up like cats and dogs, and that's the new thing, right? And the psychosis. But to me, that's a representation of the idea that they do want to detach you from a biological reality, subvert you into a metaverse type virtual reality, and then convince you can become a part of that virtual reality by eventually uploading your consciousness, right? Now, that's for the plebs. That's for, you know, the serf class. I truly believe, you know, these predators at the top in the elite circles really do believe that they can experiment on us and biologically live forever and work towards us, become the gods you talked about without sacrificing the essence of their humanity. What are your thoughts on that?
I read Homo Deus of Harari, and what you say here is more or less in line with what Harari himself articulates about the future. It's almost difficult with Harari whether he really believes what he's saying himself, whether he really promotes this view of man in the world, or whether somewhere he's trying to warn us for what could happen if we go further in that direction. But definitely, well, what you describe is how some people envision the future, definitely. So it's the ultimate attempt to rationally control the world. Yes, definitely. Yeah, I couldn't agree. It's what some people have in mind for the nearby future, and it's just the ultimate consequence of this materialist, rationalist view of man in the world. As soon as you start to believe that the entire universe is a machine, a set of elementary particles, atoms, molecules, and so on, who all interact with according to the laws of mechanics, and of which the human being is a small part, like the human being being merely a biological organism, a material, a small machine. As soon as you start to be in the grip of this view of man in the world, and I have been in the grip of that view of man in the world myself when I was 18 or 19 years old. As soon as you conceive the universe in this way and the human being in this way, the ultimate consequence is inevitably this kind of technocratic transhumanist society. And if the entire universe is a machine, you would be stupid to ask a democratically elected a politician to lead the machine. You need an engineer. You need an engineer who has as much control as possible at every point of the universe machine, and that's what some try to realize. Put everything, all human beings and all animals, full of nanoparticles, and all kinds of nanobots. Well, Harari explains it, and then you connect them all with some Neuralink machinery, Neuralink chips in the head. You connect them all to a central computer, and that's the new state. A central computer running on ChatGPT or another artificial intelligence tool, and this central computer will rule and will govern society in a much more efficient way than the most skilled politician could do. That's literally what some people like Brian Johnson, for instance, say. They literally say, I don't know if you watched that interview with Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, I know who that is. And by the way, let me just say this. At about 18 and 19, I was also in that place where I was totally and completely detached and, an atheist, and by the way, again, I'm not telling people what to believe, but certainly from life experience and just listening to these people, reading their works and seeing the fruits of their labor, you kind of have to you take yourself back and say, hey, wait a minute, these guys aren't gods. They don't have the answers to everything. They're presenting themselves as superior to me. How superior are they really? And, you mentioned Harari. I'd encourage you to look into a guy named Dennis Bushnell, who was the chief scientist at NASA. You don't know him?
No.
You do know him? Oh, well, look into him. He's a guy.
I don't.
He's a guy that's been around since he just retired last summer, but he was the chief scientist over at NASA. Been around since the Gemini days, pre-Apollo. And I've got him in 2018, essentially saying that that biological evolution, which they've sold us on again and again and again. And I'm not telling people that evolution doesn't exist. In the micro sense, I absolutely believe in evolution and evolution as compared to your environment. I think there's plenty of evidence for that, especially in the human species. There's a reason that you have, only Asians in that area. You got white people where it rained and there wasn't a lot of sun. You got black people where there's a lot of sun. You got Native American skin in a place where you have seasons, et cetera, et cetera. Seems pretty obvious. But then this sell on macro evolution, that it's species to species and we evolve from some goo and a big bang. Very skeptical of all of that. Now, Bushnell in 2018 did a conference called the FIRE Conference, and he's done a couple of these white papers. I encourage everybody to read them. But he basically says that the evolution of everything naturally, everything on the planet is over. We have taken it over. And when he says we, it's not me or you. Again, it is this technocratic super state. It is this scientific class. And we are now a part of directed evolution. And when he gets down to the basis of what happens with technology and man, it's not that they're competing, it's that they're merging, right? And he literally says in another interview, at the end of the day, we become them, they become us, or you have human contaminated machines. Now, for me, that is not a prosperous future for humanity, and we should be fighting that ideology as much as possible. How do we do that in today's world where, as you stated, and I think correctly, we have never been bombarded with so much top-down propaganda and so much narrative management by this predator or elite class that you talk about?
Oh, yes, that's what my next book is about. I mentioned it already in my previous book, The Psychology of Totalitarianism, but I will go much deeper into that in my next book. First and for all, what can we do about it? Well, first and for all, we should not conform. We should refuse to go along with it. And stuff like a digital ID and all kinds of technocratic evolutions in society, at a certain moment, we should refrain from going along with it and just say, no matter what it goes, this is the point where I refuse to go further. And that might happen. I guess it will be clear when that moment comes, when we will have to radically refuse to go along with it. But that's one thing. Of course, do not conform. Say no. And then, but of course, that in itself will not be sufficient. And I believe that, well, we will need to do all kinds of things like develop a parallel structure, develop parallel networks. But the most fundamental thing we will have to do, I always stress that, is practicing the art of sincere speech. And in Belgium and Holland, I give workshops on sincere speech. Like, sincere speech is an art which you can practice. And one of the core characteristics of sincere speech is that it is a kind of speech through which you show something of what is usually hidden behind all kinds of socially sanctioned ideal images. It's something through which you show that you do not go along with the fake social consensus. And that's in the public space. You can always also have sincere speech in family context or somewhere else. It's everywhere equally important. But sincere speech is this kind of speech which penetrates through the world of appearances, through the veil of appearances, through socially constructed lies, and which show something of a world that is usually hidden behind that veil of appearances. That's sincere speech. And that's the most important thing, because sincere speech is speech that goes through the ego, because your ego is always based on outer ideal images. And with sincere speech, you make a hole in your ego. You show something that is hidden behind the ego. And with sincere speech, through sincere speech, you start to resonate again with the world around you. You develop your intuition and your sixth sense through sincere speech. That was exactly why in samurai culture, the first rule of Budo, of the martial arts, was speak sincerely, because they knew that the more sincerely you speak, the better the sixth sense of the warrior will become, the more your intuition will develop. So, and that will be crucial, because on the one hand in society, totalitarianism is always based on a propagandized mass, a mass which is completely in the grip of a propagandized social ideal image, which is totally in the grip of a matrix of artificially imposed social norms. So that's one thing. On the one hand, you have a propagandized mass, a mass in the grip of propaganda. And on the other hand, we will slowly see the emergence of a group of people unified by sincere speech. And that's the essence of the metaphysical revolution we are going through now. We will see how this balance shifts between the propagandized mass and the group of people unified by sincerity. And that's why the art of sincere speech is it's everything. And history has shown that already. History has shown already that in every totalitarian system, the totalitarian system goes completely crazy and starts to commit the most extreme atrocities and cruelty when the dissident voice goes silent. That happened in 1930 in the Soviet Union, 1935 in Nazi Germany. Within 6 months, the destruction campaign started. And that's also exactly what, for instance, one of the major differences between a totalitarian system and a classical dictatorship. When in a classical dictatorship, the dissident voice stops speaking out in public space, the classical dictatorship gets milder. It gets milder. The dictator feels in control, and then he tries to win the people for him by showing that he is a good guy, as long as they are compliant. In a totalitarian state, exactly the opposite happens. If the resistance stops to speak out in public space, then the totalitarian system becomes cruel and extremely aggressive. So you can see it no matter from what perspective you look, you will always see the same. In totalitarian times, the point is, as Václav Havel also said, to live in truth, to reappreciate the crucial importance of truth and sincerity for a human being. And in that way, everything starts to make sense. Like this entire... Yes?
Well, let me just say this. When we talk about sincere speech, I always say that, truth is the ultimate love and love is the ultimate truth, and that lies don't make friends. But again, we've moved so far away from that, and speech, just like everything else, has become malleable, right? We don't teach those core values to people anymore. And when you do manipulate speech for an agenda, that's really where we get to modern day propaganda. We got to take one last break. We're going to focus on that propaganda aspect in this final segment. The book is The Psychology of Totalitarianism, and we'll be back with the final segment after this.
Former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, pleaded guilty today for lying to the FBI.
He was one of the most respected generals in the military.
Every American needs this historical DVD keepsake. Flynn delivered the truth, whatever the cost. Hand signed by General Michael Flynn. Order now at the Patriot TV store. Use promo code PTV at checkout to get special savings. The Patriot TV store, a secure, hassle-free shopping experience.
I don't know about you, but I have to have that cup of coffee in the morning. And Kingdom Cup is mold-free, it is pesticide-free, and it is organic. It's got this flavor that is delicious. You don't even have to put cream or sweetener in it.
Why did we go with the bean form, the whole bean? Because ultimately the powder form is the one that gathers the most moisture. And that means the more potential mold development. This is actually organic, mold-free, certified. That's important because ultimately people drink coffee. It's cultural. And so we tried to meet the culture where it is and create a healthy alternative.
Make the healthy choice for you and your family. Try mold-free, pesticide-free, and it's organic. Delicious Kingdom Cup coffee. And it's available now at the Patriot TV store. Go to patriot.tv and click on store. You'll find Kingdom Cup coffee in the health and wellness section. Order Kingdom Cup coffee at the Patriot TV store now.
And we are back. Let's talk modern day propaganda. Now, most people don't even know where the term is derived from. And there's literally a book out there called Propaganda by a gentleman named Edward Bernays. He is not only the godfather of that very short book, by the way. The introduction to that, he discusses an elite class really pulling the strings from behind the scenes, of which most names are not known. And then you see what Bernays does outside of the quote unquote traditional propaganda arena. And he's also the godfather of public relations. And really, when we talk about public relations, that's where you infiltrate not only government agendas, but corporate agendas. And you start to see that merger. I don't think that it's possible to be under a more propagandized society than where we are in the westernized world. The mainstream narrative is almost lockstep, whether it be online or on television or on the radio, with certain aspects. So what is the legacy of Edward Bernays' propaganda, public relations, and where has it gone today?
Oh yes, it's huge, of course. It's huge, of course. He was a nephew of Freud, but Freud didn't really didn't appreciate his work because he used psychology to manipulate people, and that was something that was really against Freud, his ethical awareness. But Edward Bernays, his impact is enormous. He's often called the father of spin or the father of propaganda, and it's very interesting indeed. The book you referred to is very interesting because be it only for the fact that it shows that most propagandists start from good intentions.
Well, all right, let me stop right there, because most people always think of propaganda as negative. But if you look at the actual definition, you can point towards the positive values of something and try to sell those by what? Either not mentioning the negative aspects or downplaying the negative possibilities of that. And that would be, a traditional sense of propaganda. It doesn't necessarily always have to be negative. But I would also argue, especially in today's day and age, you would be hard pressed to find truthful, positive propaganda. When you peel back the layers, there's always some sort of deception or manipulation, no?
Of course. Because like what the illusion people like Bernays fell prey to was that they needed to use propaganda, they needed to use speech and language in a manipulative way to prevent to build a good society, because they were convinced that, like, look, they found themselves confronted with a very specific problem. Of course, the ancient elite, noblemen and clergy, they could just impose their will to the population, because they could say, like, within the religious narrative, that God created certain people to rule and others to obey, and nobody really believed that, but everyone did as if it was true, and so they accepted that the ancient elite, that the noblemen and the clergy just imposed their will to the population without having to justify it. And that possibility disappeared when the rationalist fuel man in the world emerged. That from then on, there was no argument to be found anymore in the rationalist fuel man in the world to justify why the elite could just impose its will to the population. And like all the founding fathers of propaganda started from that problem. We have no solid ground anymore to impose our will to the population, meaning that rather than being leaders, the elite became followers. They had to be elected by the population. Hence, they had to try to find out what the population wanted and give the population what they wanted, or otherwise they wouldn't be elected, meaning that they did not impose their will to the population anymore. It was the other way around. The population imposed its will to the elite for a moment. And that's when propaganda kicks in. Like people like Bernays said, and to a certain extent they were right, like if the population imposes its will to us, and the entire society will fall prey to the inherently destructive and irrational tendencies in the crowds and the masses. So, meaning that the only option we have, Bernays said, is we have to make sure that the population does what we want them to do without them knowing that they do what we want them to do. In other words, we have to manipulate them all the time. And that's the strange thing. So there is a contradiction in using propaganda to create a humane, good society. Why? Because a good society, good conditions for the human being, are in the first place conditions where speech and language are honest and sincere. The essence of the human being is the quality of its speech and its words. We are our words. Perverting language through propaganda at the same time, in order to create a good society, is destroying a good society from the very onset of your project. And that's exactly why the more propaganda was developed, the more all humanity disappeared in our society. And Bernays was a very skilled manipulator. Maybe some of the audience will know the examples of how he
He got women to smoke cigarettes after the war, and he was very proud and cackling about it in his old age. Like, oh yeah, no problem. Really great guy, that Edward Bernays. We got a few minutes left in the broadcast. Obviously, we are in a major election cycle in this country. Now, I would argue, yes, there are differences between presidential administrations that do make a difference on the bottom line of not only our economic status as American citizens, but really our cultural and social status. But it also seems to me that no matter who is in office, this very real global totalitarian agenda persists and moves forward in certain regards, whether you call that a quote unquote new world order or not. That's what I see. What are your thoughts on that? Is there any real difference when it comes to this agenda with a presidential administration or a prime minister in another country, etc.?
Yes, there is. I really believe there is. Like you can clearly see, for instance, that big tech, which is together with the mass media, the mainstream media, one of the most important assets of the huge propaganda machinery. That big tech really manipulates the population in favor of the Democratic Party. So that's very clear. You can see how it suppresses all information. It tries to censor or at least demote all information which could be in favor of Trump, for instance. So there is a difference. There is definitely a difference. But at the same time, I understand that even if Trump gets elected, that won't mean that the totalitarian tendency disappears. It might be a step in the good direction, but as long as Donald Trump and his administration stick to, and a major part of the population is in the grip of this rationalist few men in the world, no matter what happens, either Trump will become totalitarian himself, because he will still be in the grip of all these structures which emerged from the rationalist few men in the world, all these military and state structures which emerged from the rationalist few men in the world, or he will become totalitarian himself, or he will create conditions which make the emergence and the rise of a new totalitarian party inevitable. So, as humanity, we need to reconnect with this resonating way, this resonating relation with the world. We need to rediscover.
Matthias, we have run out of time. Matthias Desmet, everybody. Amazing conversation. Go get the book right now, The Psychology of Totalitarianism. Folks, you know the deal for me. It is not about left or right. It is always about right and wrong. I absolutely love you guys, and we will see you on the flip side.